like to ask all panels, presenter, and the moderator of Plenary 4, please join us at the stage for the session. Thank you very much. In this session, please welcome moderator Professor Im Man-sung from KAIST, Nuclear and Quantum Engineering Department, and all the panels of Plenary 4. Please give them a warm round of applause.
Good afternoon, everybody. The previous session, we just started talking about technology of how to manage data, how to manage electric grid. I think this is a good way to start also another issue of technology. Basically, if you talk about low carbon economy or technology, the question becomes how to generate electricity. And then we will be talking about the two maybe important so-called low carbon and electricity generation technologies, that is nuclear and renewable energy. The question becomes, well, can they be working together? Aren't they competitive? Or the relationship between the two technologies, aren't they more like antagonistic? So we're going to ask that question and then try to find the answers. So we have 4 distinguished speakers in this panel, but then we'll start with our first speaker, Dr. Peter Lyons from the United States. Dr. Lyons is former Assistant Secretary of Energy for Nuclear Energy from 2011-2015, and he was also U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission's commissioner from 2009 through 2005 through 2009. And he is a member of he's a fellow of American Physics Society and a fellow of American Nuclear Society, and he has a PhD in physics from Caltech. Dr. Lyons, floor is yours. You're very tired. He just flew from Amman, and he's trying very hard to stay awake. So let's welcome him with a big round of applause.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And yes, I will try very hard to stay awake after a very long flight last night. But I do very much appreciate the opportunity to join you here today in Seoul. I've had many past visits to Korea, and I certainly welcome this opportunity as well. It's also a great honor to share this podium with certainly Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and the other distinguished speakers that we've heard from today. You've heard already today many discussions on some of the observables that we currently find around the world today. CO2 levels continue to rise, temperature records are being set, glaciers are shrinking, ice caps are shrinking, and the list goes on and on. More severe storms. So I don't think I need to discuss this. I hope we can agree that there are many observables even today of the effects of climate change, and certainly I believe those will only intensify as we go forward in time. You're probably well aware that in the United States we have a administration now with President Trump that does not wish to stay in the Paris Accord and that does not believe that climate change is caused by human activities. I note on this slide, however, that that is definitely not the view shared within even the US government by scientific organizations. I note that the US Global Change Research Program has stated the extreme likelihood that human activities, especially emissions of greenhouse gases, are the dominant cause of the observed warming. Again, that is the statement from the scientists, even the scientists working within the administration and the government, but it is not the view of our government. There also are a number of studies exploring the costs of climate change. Such studies, of course, can be open to considerable debate, considerable uncertainty in such estimates, but I'm quoting here from a paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research. It's a multinational organization looking at a wide range of countries. And their suggestion is that if we stay on a business as usual path, the United States will lose roughly 10.5% of their GDP per capita by 2100. That is a big number. Globally, their suggestion is that the number would be 7.2%. However, since I was traveling here, I thought it would be particularly interesting to explore what that same study said for South Korea. Again, I'm sure there's uncertainties, but the calculation of this organization was that for South Korea, the estimated loss would be 11.7% of GDP per capita, actually even larger than the United States. No matter what these numbers are, I hope we can agree that failure to address climate change is a very, very serious issue. Certainly one way of measuring it is from a perspective of loss of GDP. But as a father and a grandfather, I'm far more interested in thinking about climate change, about how it will affect my children and grandchildren. It's certainly no surprise, again, there have been many speakers this morning, starting with the Secretary General, that noted that global carbon emissions are not tracking the Paris Accord. There are many different studies and reports that one can use on the relative emissions in any given country. I've chosen to use one single compilation, which then tracks the emissions from fossil fuels. It's published annually by British Petroleum. I thought that would give a self-consistent view across all countries. And again, you will find slightly different numbers depending on exactly how the measurements are made, but this is tracking emissions from fossil fuels. So globally last year, and I should say first that you're probably well aware that the UN Emissions Gap Report, which came out just last month, said that the current pace of global emissions and the current trajectory of those emissions are on pace to rise by, their estimate was 3.9 degrees C. That is a very, very different number than the 1.5 degrees C that was the target of the Paris Accords. And that same emission gap report said that in order to get back to meeting the Paris Accords, we needed to reduce by 7.6% per year on global emissions. So I collected a number of different statistics on, these are all increases, not decreases. Globally, 2%. The United States is certainly not doing well. South Korea is certainly not doing well. The number that British Petroleum gave for China at 2.2 is actually better than other reports I've seen, but I'm staying with one data set. And the number for India is terrible, as you're all well aware. Also, as I looked at trying to obtain data for this talk, I found it very interesting to look at South Korea's so-called 8th Basic Plan for Electricity Supply and Demand, which I believe is your current document, I believe issued in 2017. That indicates the percent of electricity derived from coal in 17 and 30, and the amount of nuclear in 17 and 30. As a non-Korean, as an outsider, I can only say that I'm very, very puzzled how Korea, on the one hand, can be very interested in global climate change, and at the same time can maintain coal with hardly any decrease. To me, that is just very puzzling. And similarly, Korea is a global leader in nuclear energy. You and the United States have very safe nuclear power. You have a strong regulator. South Korea, among, I would say, democracies, is by far the leader in construction of nuclear power plants. They've done much better than the United States and France. So I'm just very puzzled why you would wish to reduce your dependence on nuclear as you go into the future. And I'm sure there's many political issues here that, again, as an outsider, I don't understand. But as a scientist and looking at it logically, it's very, very puzzling to me. In both of our countries, we rely very, very heavily on fossil fuels. And if both our countries are serious about climate change, we must deploy clean energy options. Now, climate change is not the policy, or concerns about climate change is not the policy of our current administration. I dearly wish that it would be. But nevertheless, if one is to look towards clean energy options, we really have very few of them. Solar and wind, they're wonderful sources. We need to increase them dramatically, but nothing changes the fact that they are intermittent and less storage is attached to them, and they are highly weather dependent. and that their use places additional demands on the grid. But I am not arguing against solar and wind. You will find in my talk that I am looking for a partnership between solar, wind, and nuclear. Capacity factors for solar and wind are low. I've taken data for the United States. I would guess that Korea is somewhat similar, but capacity factors are very, very low. For solar PV, for concentrating solar power, and for wind, the numbers are all quite low. And there's also many discussions in the literature and in actual data that solar and wind tend to obviously produce a great deal of power when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. And the cost then, or the prices for that solar generated electricity or wind, tend then to drop when there's a great surplus. So the cost is certainly impacted by the supply, which is not exactly news. I don't list hydro here. We certainly have hydro in the United States. It's a wonderful resource, but it also could not possibly be expanded in the United States. At least I don't believe it could. I don't know your situation in Korea, but in the United States there's more pressure to remove dams than build dams. So I do not anticipate any increase in hydro in the United States, except possibly for some increased efficiency on existing units. So then turning to nuclear power, it has the highest reliability, it's independent of weather, and it's baseload. And for both the United States and Korea, we are some of the world leaders in terms of capacity factors, meaning our ability to operate plants safely and continuously. Those numbers are well over 90% in both countries, and that is spectacular performance, which I certainly compliment my colleagues in South Korea and in the United States. And for clean energy, I list clean fossil, but I'm not holding my breath for clean fossil. I'm not a chemist. Maybe there are some chemists here who know how to make clean fossil energy cost effective. I hope they succeed. And when they succeed, then clean fossil energy can join this list of clean energy sources. But I don't see that as economic, even close to economic today. So where does that leave us? And in the United States, and I'm sure here in Korea, we have some people who would say, well, we can do it all with renewables. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the speculation in the United States and around the world on can you do it all with renewables. One of my heroes in climate change is Dr. Jim Hansen. I hope his reputation is also well known in this country. He certainly is not a proponent of nuclear power. He is a proponent of addressing climate change, and he has been one of the leading spokesmen in the United States for many years to recognize the importance of dealing with climate change. I've given you just some of his quotes here, that nuclear will make the difference between the world missing crucial climate targets or achieving him. And I especially like his second quote, that policy needs to be based on facts, not on prejudice. And the comment that climate systems cares about greenhouse gas emissions, not where those emissions came from. And from a climate standpoint, we need clean power, whether it's renewable or nuclear power. And then the third quote about meeting all our energy needs with renewables, and his statement that such scenarios downplay or ignore the intermittency issue by making unrealistic technical assumptions and can contain high levels of biomass and hydro at the expense of true sustainability. Now, I've already mentioned that in the United States, our administration is not supportive of climate change and has taken actions, many actions that certainly demonstrates that. But I also want to emphasize on this slide that there's a tremendous disconnect between what our administration says and what our companies are actually doing. So, for example, Duke Power, Duke Energy, is one of our largest companies in the United States. And Duke has been very public about outlining how they are going to reduce their carbon footprint. They're dramatically reducing their coal use between 2017 and 2030. They already have a substantial amount of nuclear, and they've announced that they're going to extend the license, or going to apply to extend the licenses of every one of their nuclear plants. They're not interested in closing nuclear power plants, they're interested in maintaining them. And then the quotation there, we do not believe 100% renewables can reliably deliver the power required by a modern economy. And I guess I should say economically deliver. And going on to say they don't advocate for 100% of anything else either. And again, to me, that's only logical. I don't see why you would want to put, we would say, all your eggs in one basket. Having a diversity of fuel supply is a vital attribute of an effective energy grid. I should also note that many of our companies and many companies around the world are recognizing that in order to do business globally, they must reduce their carbon footprints, and that is very likely to become a requirement for international commerce in the future. So many of our companies are on record as working diligently to reduce their carbon footprints. There's also been some interesting work, I found it very interesting, at MIT recently. This shows a study at MIT of the costs of power in Europe depending on the amount of wind and solar installed per capita. And the point here is simply that for a country like Germany that is certainly increasing its dependence on renewables, electricity is a very costly commodity. And that's simply because, as we've already said, the intermittency requires other dispatchable options for electricity. And I might also note that these same studies go on to say that even those countries like Germany that are installing large amounts of renewables are not reducing their emissions. And in fact, if you compare the emissions in Germany per kilowatt hour, for example, to France, I don't remember what the difference is, but it's gigantic, approaching a factor of 10. France is has an extremely clean electrical supply. Germany has been so busy building coal plants, along with renewables, that they, in my view, are hardly a model that we should be trying to emulate. There's also another very interesting article recently from MIT where they looked at what it would, of the impact of trying to go to very large amounts of renewables and doing it solely with batteries. Their study was based on lithium-ion batteries, and their study assumed that the battery cost would drop by a factor of 3. They looked at it for California, where California certainly has the goal of 100% of electricity from renewables, but actually I should note, California's goal is not 100% from renewables, it is 100% clean, and that is a big difference. The same, for example, with Washington State. The goal is not 100% renewables, it is 100% clean. Nevertheless, their study was what if the goal was 100% renewables for California. They found that electricity prices in their model would be about 30 times higher than they are right now, and they're already plenty high. And they also looked at what it would take in the United States. There they looked only at going to 80% of renewables in the United States and came up with a $2.5 trillion cost estimate, and that number escalates wildly as you go towards 100%. I would again just make the point that diversity of sources, to me, is logical and smart in any system. There's also other agencies that are studying this. The International Energy Agency, which is certainly not an advocate for nuclear, has come up with very strong statements within the last few months on the need for including nuclear power in clean energy transitions around the world, and suggesting that one needs to significantly expand the use of nuclear energy. And I found it very interesting to look at the very recent resolution of the European Parliament, in which I think for the first time, but maybe my colleagues will correct me, that nuclear energy is now listed as playing a role in climate solutions. I think that's a new position for the European Parliament, since some countries have strongly rejected that argument. So let me turn to the basic point I wanted to make. I think that looking at combinations of renewables and nuclear is the logical step as we move into a clean energy future. Some people call them hybrid systems, some people call them integrated systems, but in any case, renewable and nuclear are the only clean energy sources that we have that we can deploy today. Furthermore, I make the observation that one has to decarbonize far more than the electricity sector if you really want to decarbonize the entire energy sector. In the United States, I don't know the number for Korea, but in the United States, 40% of our emissions are from the electrical sector, which means 60% art from the electrical sector. So if you're serious about decarbonization, you need to apply clean energy, certainly to electricity, but you need to go beyond just electricity. And then other comments here on the need to maintain fuel diversity and the need for reliability. Now, in any of the hybrid systems that we've been studying, they're designed so that it optimizes the contributions of both nuclear and renewables. And this was something I worked on very hard when I was in the Department of Energy. And I succeeded in building a very strong partnership between the renewables and nuclear. We have a laboratory in the United States devoted to renewables, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We have a laboratory, our lead laboratory for nuclear in Idaho National Lab. Those two laboratories created, with some encouragement, a very, very strong partnership. And I'm very pleased that that partnership continues today, long after I'm gone. And those partnerships, I think, are exploring many, many options for coupling renewables and nuclear in intelligent ways. Now, I give some caveats or at least issues to worry about here. I note that grid optimization probably is going to have different amounts of renewables and nuclear in different climates, in different countries. There can be many different reasons. Some places have lots of hydro. That's wonderful. If you have the hydro, that's great. But I think there will be significant differences between countries. And it may well be that in some applications, combining renewables and nuclear with some form of storage, but I would say probably not batteries if you're talking about grid storage for long term. It might be pumped hydro, it might be heat storage. And I wanted to just mention that there's been some beautiful work here in Korea, and I give the reference down here. It's got somewhat scrambled as my slide was translated, on a heat storage and recovery facility for Korean nuclear power plants using an ultra-large floating barge. It's an extremely clever paper, and it basically talks about gigantic barges filled with rocks and oil that are used to store large quantities of heat for very long times. And in general, this article and many others are making the point that it is far simpler to store heat than it is to store electricity. And again, I think these will all continue to develop as we look into the future. Now, this particular slide is from Idaho National Lab, but you would see the same slide if you went to the National Renewable Energy Lab or if you went to MIT or many other of our universities. And it talks about how we need to change the focus today where electricity is the only output, whether it's nuclear power or solar or wind. And that we need to look at a range of future energy systems in which, again, you have reactors, you have wind, you have solar, you may have some fossil fuel. Some of those will provide heat directly, some will provide electricity directly. And that could change how you use their outputs and how you store their outputs. But then the graph of this slide also goes on to show that there are many potential applications for the use of this combined energy. And with this combined energy, by using the complementary nature, one intermittent, one base load, one can come up with extremely effective grid systems. In the talk at lunch from Hyundai, they talked about the importance of hydrogen production. There's beautiful work being done already on that. France announced some months ago that EDF has launched a hydrogen subsidiary using nuclear power to produce clean hydrogen. And you're probably well aware that hydrogen is usually produced from steam methane reforming of natural gas, and it's anything but clean. It's extremely dirty. But France, I think, is the leader in the first use that I'm aware of a commercial hydrogen production from nuclear energy. The United States since has made 2 large awards, one to Exelon, which is our largest company, to test an electrolyzer at a light water plant. And of special interest, I should note that the award to Exelon did not come from the nuclear energy part of DOE. It came from the renewable energy part of DOE, because renewable energy is recognizing that they must have large quantities of hydrogen, and they recognize that nuclear may be a very good way of doing it. The third award here is from the Office of Nuclear Energy within just the last 2 months. It's to 3 of our large companies, our large utility companies, and looking towards the use of electrolyzers, again, for clean hydrogen production. There's many, many international conferences now going on looking at hybrid energy, and I'm extremely gratified to see that Korea is one of the leaders in this. But my first comment here is on something called the NICE initiative, the Clean Energy Nuclear Initiative Clean Energy, the NICE Future Initiative, which was discussed at the Clean Energy Ministerial in Copenhagen in May of 2018. It was launched by the United States, Japan, and Canada. There are a number of other partners, but not Korea, as far as I know, which I'm somewhat surprised by. And it is looking again at integration of nuclear and renewable systems. And then my second bullet, the conference that Dr. Yim chaired in Jeju just last year, an excellent international conference on exploring the interconnections, the integration of nuclear and renewables. There are now IAEA conferences devoted to hybrid energy. And in all of these, I think we're seeing more and more interest around the world in avoiding any competition between nuclear and renewables, and instead saying we have 2 good, clean options. What can we do to have them work together for the betterment of all people? So in conclusion, to me, the science and observables of climate change are compelling. I doubt that's an argument here. I think you probably believe the impacts of climate change will be severe. We're seeing them now, and boy, are we going to see them in the future. I strongly believe that the world must utilize all of its clean energy sources, and right now that's renewables, a lot of renewables, some nuclear, and maybe clean fossil. And above all, I think we need to look at integration of the clean energy sources that we have to address multiple energy sectors in order to achieve deep decarbonization across eventually the entire world. Thank you very much, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Surprisingly, not only he stayed up well, but very sharp. Appreciate it very much. We have very excellent 3 speakers from our panel. Let me introduce all of our discussants first, and then we'll give the microphone to each of the speakers. The first one is from the country of France, who just mentioned by the talk in Dr. Lyons, ambassador of France to South Korea. He's a 32 years of Korea diplomat. He fluently speaks 5 different languages. He just started his job here as ambassador in Korea February 1st, 2019. And the second, our discussant, Dr. Jin-Woo Park, he is so-called our energy czar, South Korea's energy director for the energy strategic planning. So he currently leads all of the R&D planning efforts of South Korea from Ministry of Industry. And also he is a professor in chemical engineering of Yongnam University with PhD at University of Florida. He is a member of National Academy of Engineering. Also he is former past president of Solar Technology Development Society of South Korea. And our third discussant is President In-Sup Chung. He is the CEO of Hanwha Energy Corporation, 25 years of professional experience in management, overseas development, as well as policy and politics. He also served as a staff member in the Blue House in the previous administration. And he just started his job as a CEO of Hanwha Energy Corporation September this year. So he can give us all the update of what is going on in the industry. So with all these great speakers, let's start with our Ambassador Rupuru.
안녕하세요. 비리블레펄입니다. 프랑스 대사. I don't speak really Korean. 열심히 공부해요. Maybe next September we'll see what is the state of my mastery of the language. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lyons, for your extremely interesting and comprehensive presentation, and thank you also for referring to France in your speech. Indeed, I believe that we are a bit in an exceptional situation in France because, as you know, I think we are the first country to do such a large use of nuclear energy in our energy mix, because nuclear energy is 43% of the energy mix, natural gas is 15%, coal 4%, it will be zero in 2022, and renewable is 8.5%. And in the electricity mix, if you take on the electricity production, it's largely dominated by nuclear, 73%. I think we are the only country to reach this level. We didn't develop, actually, nuclear energy to face climate change. Originally, it was a program launched in 1974, after the first oil shock. It was to develop our independence, on energetical independence and the energy safety of our citizens. Let me prolong a little bit what you said, Professor Lyons, in taking in account what is the level of public awareness in France regarding what we shall call now the climate crisis, because we are already in the crisis. We believe that if we can reach, the objective of staying below the 2% cap of climate change, we will already live in a different world where resources, agriculture, industry, conditions of living will be very different of what we know today. If we go beyond 3 degrees, and even in the scenario of a business as usual 7 degrees, we will change the geography of the Earth, and therefore end our civilization as it exists today. This is a very serious crisis. It's certainly the first threat to humanity currently going on, with many others, unfortunately. So in France, we have a very high degree of awareness on climate change. I think we were the number one, we spearheaded the fight against climate change in the COP21 in Paris. And we are pretty much behind our British friends to reach the objectives of the COP26 in Glasgow, even if the result of Madrid is not extremely encouraging. We believe that we have to mobilize together the international community. And of course, you can count on France, alongside with the EU and the UK, to be ambitious and encourage its main partners to live up to the stakes. The second consideration is responsibility. Of course, we need energy. Well, theoretically, it will be very possible to live only by renewable energy, like we did in the Middle Ages, by reducing the population to 500 million, consuming 500 less times energy than the average inhabitant of France or the United States or Britain. That would not be easy. That would mean that the majority of the population of Earth would have to disappear in a way or another. So we have a responsibility towards our future generations, that's clear. But we need also to guarantee stable energy sources for our population and ensure energy security. We have a plan at national level that I would like to present in a few words, which is, of course, extremely ambitious, but I think also realistic, provided that we use all available solutions, as it was said by Dr. Lyons. First, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in 2030 compared to 1990. Decarbonize all energy consumption and reduce the use of fossil fuel by 30% by the same date of 2030 compared to 2012. And then achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. How do we reach these goals? I think the most important to answer today is electricity production and consumption. Indeed, there is not only electricity consumption. Transportation is very important still, but I think electricity consumption is the first target, suddenly. It will be all more important that we are going to rely less and less on fossil fuels, also especially for transportation and heating. Regarding electricity production, we will decarbonize definitely our electricity production, and we will close the last coal-fired power plants by 2022, within 2 years. Our second goal is to increase the share of renewable, 32% of total energy consumption by 2030. This is today 20% for electricity production. And then, of course, I wouldn't say reduce nuclear energy, but relativize it. Now it's 73%. We will go down to somewhere like 50% by 2035. It means the closure of 14 reactors by 2035, but not, absolutely not, phasing out of nuclear. I insist on that. So you were asking us the question of, at the core of this presentation, can we seek an alliance between renewable and nuclear energy? I would say yes and no. Everything is in the World Alliance. First, because both of them are decarbonized, nuclear and renewable. If your top priority is to fight against climate change, and considering the stakes, it should be a top priority for all of us, then the alliance between nuclear energy and renewables is a perfect match because they do not produce greenhouse effect gas. One could say that, though, that 100% renewable is another option. Is it realistic? I don't believe so. Then, well, we don't make a link between the development of renewables and the closure of nuclear power plants. And we don't do it for a good reason. You cannot substitute nuclear energy with renewables because those two energies are not comparable in power and in capacity of generation. Indeed, as long as better batteries are not available to store energy, the only source of energy which offers stable and reliable energy are either fossil fuels or nuclear. As the fight against climate change is a top priority for French people, we choose to maintain nuclear energy. Well, of course, it comes with challenges. Firstly, we need to support the development of renewable while being realistic. If technology or improved interconnection among European networks offer us opportunities, of course, then why not being more ambitious? And well, there are a lot of discussion around the world regarding smart grids at regional level, European level, possibly also Asian level. There is a very realistic perspective to interconnect Japan, China, Russia with Mongolia. Therefore, by making a sort of share of renewable energy through submarine cables. And that would be extremely rational, since in Mongolia, for example, you have large spaces with a lot of wind and a lot of sun that could produce clean, renewable energy for the rest of the region. It's possible in Europe. It's even possible at world level, where we could balance the production of energy through renewable at world level by using a smart grid, using the difference between north and south, night and day. That's possibly indeed that is indeed a possibility. So there are, of course, regarding nuclear, two challenges: safety and waste. Well, France, as I said, is 73% nuclear for electricity, and therefore, as you can understand, we have been extremely demanding on safety, which is a top priority. And we had never any serious accidents in our nuclear plants. Secondly, and well, of course, it's nice to be a bit polemical at the end of a speech. I think that the problem of nuclear waste is solved, industrially and technically. Well, of course, nuclear plants produce waste. You have to keep in mind that the equivalent in energy of 1 kilogram of fuel, of nuclear fuel, is something like 46 tons of oil fuel and more than 76 tons of coal. And this kilogram of nuclear fuel can be reduced in something like 200 grams of waste, which is perfectly stable and manageable. Well, I'll be able to elaborate on that if there are questions about it, but technically, it's perfectly realistic to think that we are able to solve the question of nuclear waste. This is a fact. And this is why, indeed, France is also at the forefront of waste management and retreatment. We already work with China, Japan, and some European countries to retreat their nuclear waste in an efficient and secure manner. Well, maybe a last reason to hope, which is and it's referring to the previous discussion, the digital transformation. It is a fantastic accelerator of progress and innovation, including in the sector of energy. I think we can have plants better designed, safer, easier to test, much easily with artificial intelligence and the new tools provided by the digital transformation. And it's also an extremely important leverage for optimization. So we are in the crisis, but we believe that we have already the scientific and industrial tools to overcome it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next speaker, Dr. Park.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Professor Lim. This is my second time to be invited by Professor Lim. First one was NURA 2018, last year in Jeju Island. Well, I can see that there are many Koreans not using translator device, so I'll just keep my presentation in English. This one. Well, I agree both the comments from Peter and also Philip, that in the general term. So in Korea, we all agree on the general term, but when we go down to detailed term, then we don't agree. So I'd like to point a couple of the issues that Korea is facing. And I started my position at the end of previous government, and I'm finishing my term 3 years and 1 month, end of this month. So I'm finishing my term in the middle of the current government. I was going through all these big issues that after the election and all this energy transition, even denuclearization. But actually, the government, what the government is currently doing is not denuclearization, even though the slogan is denuclearization. We're trying to minimize, actually reduce the percentage of nuclear, and try to increase the percentage of renewables, and try to manage the energy infrastructure by using core technology from fourth industrial revolution, like data science and all the monitoring prediction capabilities. So I'll skip this one because most of you are the energy expert. Final energy consumption is keep increasing, and by 2050 it will be almost double. And another big trend is electrification is also much ahead than other forms of energy. So this is a fact, and also Korea has been experiencing the electrification, I guess, much earlier than other countries, because we changed our heating and cooling infrastructure using electricity. In several other countries outside of Korea, they use heat for heating, but in Korea, even this building, all the commercial building, is heated by electricity in the last almost 20 years. So we electrified much faster than other countries. So we know what's going to happen, what problem that you can face when you electrify. I'll skip this one, but just mention two concepts. I guess the world agrees on two terms: decarbonization and decentralization and digitalization. But how to decarbonize? Some people take the route of reducing nuclear. Some countries keeping the nuclear and expanding the renewable. So the big debate still going on in Korea. Well, if you see this chart, as a managing director, I have visitors from many different countries. And some people come to talk about joint business with Korea for new nuclear business, including Czech Republic, Poland, even Argentina government. They're interested in nuclear development. So we agree, okay, we work together. But the question goes to how to finance that project. Then things go very complicated. Because even UK government and many countries try to develop nuclear business, but we cannot locate good funding sources. Okay? Because the major finance companies, they like to have a quick return with the lowest risk as possible. So they can find much favorable project from renewables and energy efficiencies. They can have quick return. But when you want to decide into the nuclear business, you have to have a long-term commitment with all the regulation risk and things like that. So for the IEA report says that the new investment in 2017, almost 73% of the new investment went to renewables, and 22.6% went to fossil. This is very unfortunate, and to say that the money for the fossil fuels come mainly from 3 countries: Korea, Japan, and China. Even the European countries, now they say green financing, so they don't support fossil. Korea, Japan, and China are still supporting the fossil. So fossil is second. And third is nuclear. Okay? Even though the nuclear has very good benefits and advantages, money is not going into that direction. I can tell this story in almost 30 minutes and we can have a good discussion, but this is a fact. And in 2018, preparing this talk, I look at the new data, this global data, the same thing. Global data includes China, India, and everybody. Still, renewable is $300 billion US. Network means the grid of modernization, energy efficiency, go to second. Fossil, still third. Nuclear, fourth. Okay? So I like to mention that this is a fact that then we have to think about why money is not going into certain sector and why money is going to another sector. Okay? I think Professor Lim will cover this one, so I'll skip this one. Korea is heavily based on the industry. Industry use about 62% of final energy. Okay? So when we want to do something, we have to always consider the industry consumption. Commercial and household consumption is important, but the percentage is low. So in our situation, it's very different even from Germany. I skipped this slide because of time limitation, but Germany and Korea use about the same electricity consumption per year, 550 terawatt hour. But Germany has 2.5 larger GDP and about 1.6 more population. Okay? But they only use 29% for industry. In contrast to Korea uses 61% energy. How can we stably support our energy consuming industry? We cannot just close the factory down, right? We rely on the industry and export. So whenever we talk about this during preparing the third energy master plan, I was one of the steering committee member, and we just finalized the fourth energy technology development plan last week. I was also the steering committee member. That in Korea, especially because we use 62% of electricity by the industry, energy strategy without considering the industry is meaningless. Okay? But what's going on in our industry, I have no time to talk about, but our industry stopped growing, it's become pretty much saturated and stay stagnant. So if you look at this, this is from a Korea bank, that before subprime mortgage 2008 or so, the percentage of manufacturing industry contribution to the GDP, manufacturing industry was the largest one. But since 2010 and 11, the yellow part is a service industry, and the blue part is the manufacturing industry. Okay? And we have about 2 to 3% annual GDP growth. That means that manufacturing industry is not growing in the last 10 years. This is not just one-time phenomenon. This is a structured, slowed growth pattern, which means that the energy consumption also not growing as much. So if you look at this chart very shortly, the numbers under the table, since 2012, the primary energy increase compared to last year was 0 to 2%. If you subtract the increase of oil for automobiles, it's almost constant or sometimes minus growth. That means that industry is not using energy as we used to spend. Okay? So this complicates the situation. And also another situation that I have to emphasize is that our consumption pattern. Okay? At this moment, our total electricity generating capacity is about 124 gigawatt installed capacity of electricity. And last year we peaked at 92.5 gigawatt for a week, very short time for a week. But look at this figure on the right. After 2 months, in September, the minimum consumption went down to 48 gigawatt. So from 92 gigawatt to 48 gigawatt, there's a 40 gigawatt peak to valley difference. This is very unusual in other countries' consumption pattern. Why this happened? Because our energy policy just focus on supplying to the peak demand. So whenever the peak goes up, we build the power plant. So now, on the average, some power plant operation rate is sometimes they are experiencing less than 30% operation. So this gives a pretty big burden for their business. Okay? And also the electricity price is controlled by the government. They cannot increase the electricity price. So what has to be done? Do we still have to build more power plants with this very slowing industry consumption trend? Or we have to try to somehow change this pattern from 40 gigawatt difference to maybe possibly to 20 gigawatt, just like normal countries outside Korea. Okay? So this is very long, so I'll skip this slide. So even though politicians work on the slogan, specialists like me and government officials, we work on the facts and we consider all kinds of aspects on the same table. Okay? So this is the time for Korea that somehow restructure the energy mix portfolio in a direction towards the more favorable pattern. So which means that reducing the peak to valley difference as much as possible. There are several ways to do that, but 2 ways that we can do is peak shifting in the daytime and peak shaving. Okay? We can do that by increasing the energy efficiency and also providing renewable energy electricity in a way that, in a positive way of dealing with this national energy supply and demand trend. So the first strategy is restructure. I'm not saying denuclearization. I'm saying that restructuring energy mix portfolio and enhance energy efficiency and create new business based on data science and fourth industrial revolution technical, elements. What can we do about existing core industries in energy, coal and nuclear? Even though it's very, very hard, we try to export, and we try to put more R&D in the future direction, not building the existing one, because the existing one has many, many problems. I guess Ambassador Philip talked about nuclear waste. I can talk in the discussion time, but Korea still does not have solution for high-level nuclear waste. As an MD, my last job was launching about 350 million Korean won? 3,500억 원네. Big project for the dry storage that has been rejected 4 times. As an MD, I proposed to the government 4 times, but the last 2 weeks ago, they approved. And the reason they reject this, even the reasonable proposal, was that there is no dialogue made and no conclusion made from the Nuclear Safety Agency. Okay? But anyway, we try to persuade that this is R&D. We have to prepare for the future. So that project will start from next year. Okay? And also we have to talk about, that when we try to invest to the new area, energy is not just energy itself. Energy is related with other industries. For example, solar is related with semiconductor display, wind power related to shipbuilding, steel, marine, hydrogen. The reason we are pushing for the hydrogen is we like to find the new way of revitalizing our economy, but very, very difficult. If you look at each sector, it's no easy solution. We think that hydrogen economy can be used as a method to revitalizing our core industry, because it is related to automobile, petrochemical, steel, fertilizer industry, and so on. Okay. So the basic direction is written in the third energy master plan. We're changing our gear towards the renovation and energy consumption pattern compared to the previous ones, which was focused on the supply, stable supply, direction, and transition towards clean and safe energy. And we set only the renewable energy target to 30 to 35% by the year 2040. Other mixed portfolio is not decided, and it will be decided by the first half of next year by so-called 9th electricity supply and demand plan. So the working group is working on how to re-optimize. So for that, I guess we have to have a serious discussion that what can we do about fossil and nuclear. But this government, when we made and proposed the third energy master plan, we added another new sentence that we will aggressively reduce the fossil. I guess that message can be included in the discussion. Okay, I'll skip this one. This is a renewable energy portfolio status, and I'll leave this presentation file to you so you can later check on this one. I guess this is the PV. And I'd like to finish my presentation by just showing very, very recent data. Right now we have about cumulative 9.5 gigawatt solar. Okay? And look at the data from 2011, 12, and 13. The peak time was 3 p.m. in Korea. More than 99% electricity generation all connected to the KEPCO grid. So we don't have significant level of self-consumption. Okay, it's almost very minimal. So all the generated electricity connected to the central grid, it was 3 p.m. But if you look at the data from 2016 and 17, where the PV installed capacity increased to a certain level, our peak time moved from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. So this is a favorable situation, because if we can move this peak shift to 7 p.m., then we can avoid the daytime peak, which is very reasonable. But in another sense, it's causing trouble, because we did not expect that type of peak shifting, and our electricity management system is not ready for that. Our electricity management system is only based on the, getting the electricity fare from the, consumers, but not dealing with this situation. This is a new situation that we have to solve. And another one is that the biggest renewable penetration is in Jeju Island, which is, island from mainland. And in 2018, and they experienced, in November 22nd, they expand almost 50% renewable electricity in Jeju Island for the first time in Korea. The mainland is much, much lower, maybe 8%, 7%, but Jeju Island, they experience 49% renewable electricity on one day. So this is not a general phenomenon in Korea, but it's showing the future of Korea if we expand the renewable without preparing all the control mechanisms. And you can see here the number of curtailments and amount of curtailments increases in proportional to the renewable increases. So right now what we are doing, the Jeju provincial government and central government try to construct a new so-called voltage source control high voltage VC line in addition to the two existing lines which does not have that capability. So this kind of things has to be done. So to accommodate more renewables into our electricity mix, basically we have to have technical implications in all areas of generation, transmission, distribution, in all the sector. Okay? There's no free lunch. So we have to work on all this technology development. So I'll finish with, because nuclear community is very angry about government initiatives. I want to tell you that the government is working on the fact and not working on the slogan. So even the newspaper people does not show this. I want to show this too because I was in the steering committee preparing for this third energy master plan and fourth energy technology development plan. Okay? Even though we decide not to build the existing technology-based nuclear power plant, we decide to invest more on the R&D. So actually, nuclear R&D funding is increasing, keep increasing throughout this government. Dismantling technology and also the support research on nuclear fusion, especially small modular reactors, power source for extreme environments, and so on. And based on third energy master plan, fourth energy technology plan, development plan has been made also on the same basis. Okay? So I didn't have time to change it in English. So to show you this roadmap, this is this will be announced next month in January, because now it's okay. I'm finishing up. So you don't have to read all this, but I can show you the third column, this one. This one. This is load following nuclear. We're investing R&D on that, and this is renewable related offshore floating SMR technology development. And also here, this is research on the hydrogen generation by nuclear reactors. So this is a roadmap prepared by the government. Okay? So in conclusion, Korea has very unique situation of dealing with the electricity, energy supply and demand. We have very unique peak to valley difference. We have to somehow minimize the difference. And also the nuclear waste problem is a much, much worse problem than other countries because we cannot reprocess. We only have to bury or store in the dry environment. And we don't have technology for that. So we cannot build houses without bathroom. Okay? That situation is different from other countries like France. You have a nuclear waste disposal problem, but we don't. So I guess, but expecting for the new technology to develop in the recent future, that I hope the nuclear power plant work nicely with the renewable energy in near future as possible. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Now, President Chung will conclude the discussion.
Okay, can I give a speech in my seat because I didn't prepare the big such kind of the presentation. So, yeah, okay. Actually, I agree with all other panels' opinion, especially Mr. Lyons. I agree with your opinion for the energy mix. I'm the only panel from the business area, so I want to add just comment. Because my company starts from the coal power plant and we moved to the solar energy. Right now we develop the solar project in all around the world, including USA, Japan, Spain, Australia. And then also we developed some project for the LNG and hydrogen power. But I think all the energy source has limitation. So nothing is perfect. So we need time to wait for the perfect energy source. It means based on the technology development. So before that time, we have only the solution. We should maximize our existing technology for the energy. So the nuclear, solar, LNG, in all the source we should combine. And then this can make the efficiency in the cost. In business-wise, most important thing is the cost efficiency. So I think that we should focus on such kind of fact. So my opinion is the energy mix is the only solution right now, and we are waiting for the perfect energy source in the future. That is my comment.
Thank you. Based on the abstracts I received, the question I raised at the beginning of this panel, is this relationship competitive or antagonistic or cooperative? We didn't clearly see that, so I thought I would put something on this, a little bit of my own presentation. I started asking this question myself in 1980. I was one of the people responsible for the development of what we call load follow technology in South Korea. At that time, my success, I realized, will become a major development in nuclear technology. Is that a good thing for this country, or is that a bad thing for this country? So 1990, I shifted my focus. I actually changed my career a little bit. But based on my previous experiences and so far, I have come to some realization that is already shared, there is no free lunch. But question is now, how will you move forward into the future? This slide already showed. As you may have noticed at the beginning of this session, I was in a hurry because I knew that this was going to be a time crunch at the end. So I'm going to make it very short. I'll skip this. We are producing a lot of carbon. We're consuming a lot of energy. We produce a lot of, basically consumes a lot of resources as a country. But as a country, South Korea has a huge challenge in terms of energy policy. We don't have energy security. We import more than 94% of our energy from outside now. It used to be 97%. So renewable energy is definitely a way to go because that's something we can create on our own land. But then our transmission lines are already full. So anything new that you want to put into the electricity grid, including nuclear power or anything, it'll be very challenging. So the future is on the distributed energy system. So country has to develop into this distributed energy system. But at the same time, South Korea has one of the high social costs in energy development and infrastructure development. I have a figure. This is the cost of low-level waste development, this disposal. Compared to any other country, our cost is very high because of social cost. Just going backward. As you can see, I mean, this is no-brainer. Low carbon energy, we have to use nuclear or renewable. But then as Dr. Lyon mentioned, we have this pattern of energy demand changes. Something works as base load, something works as intermittent power, and we have to use all of them. But then the question becomes, can the combination of nuclear power and renewable handle this kind of load change? So I actually have a bunch of slides, but I will go through this quickly. Basically, South Korea has a very good industry base. You have a world-class industry present here, and other technology like ESS, and then transmission and power grid, ICT, and so on. We also have a know-how of how to realize the smart grid in Jeju Island projects and etc. We have a very good nuclear power technology, as mentioned. And we have a huge consumer of commodity and heat as well. But then we don't have a policy to support this kind of development. We have very difficult situation in terms of changing electricity rates. So it's very hard to create market to do anything more innovative. And we don't have a control tower. So we have a Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Science and Technology, we have a Ministry of Economy, Knowledge Economy, and then Ministry of Environment. No one is in charge. But then I think we have an opportunity. I think we have now realized that there is an opportunity. This concern the current situation of South Korea and then capabilities presented by renewable energy and nuclear power. We have to be seriously thinking about how to combine this. Hydrogen economy, that's one thing we discussed earlier. We have basically national demand to move toward the renewable development and existing capabilities of conventional technologies. Many countries have already done this, actually. About 28 countries are doing desalination using nuclear power. About 40-some countries are doing this, the other way around. District heating, and these other countries doing actually cogeneration using nuclear power, heat, doing something else. So this example already exists out there in the European countries, as well as Japan and Russia and many countries. So here is a concept of nuclear and renewable based combination. The upper one, left one is a conventional system, but the below we see the potentially a new way of doing it. So energy generated by plants not only produce electricity, but also commodity or heat for the industry. The nuclear reactors used to be very large, like this, but now actually the whole system is combined into this integrated system. And we even have a what I call micro modular reactor, small truck kind of reactor, 12 megawatt electric, developed by KAIST, 150 tons, still heavy, but you can move it around and then you can be actually served as a sort of a dispatchable power source. So can we use latest technologies? By the way, these technologies are basically based on what I call passive safety. And there are many applications of the heat produced. This is an example of calculation I performed with our students, combination of nuclear power and photovoltaic, and talking about electricity cost. We can show that this, based on obviously a lot of assumptions, but then the cost combining renewable and nuclear can be competitive compared to the use of natural gas. So, and then can the high penetration of photovoltaic, solar power, be supported by nuclear power if nuclear power does the load following? And based on this calculation, if the load follow is done by nuclear by 2 megawatt per minute or 3 megawatt per minute, the renewable high penetration, more than 30% plus, can be covered. And even if nuclear power doesn't perform load follow, some people in the nuclear community, they hate load following by using nuclear technology because nuclear power is the most cost effective when it is running as a base load. So if nuclear power is running just as a base load, can it still help high penetration of solar power, more than 40%? And the calculation is done based on the assumption of demand response. I saw many posters out there, you're doing, thinking about demand response. We use the demand response using the steel industry, consumption, and so on. Using the industry demand response method, using nuclear power as a base load, and with very high solar power penetration, we can do it. There are threats, high cost, and then also public acceptance issue, which is a huge issue right now in Korea, but maybe we can discuss that later. Here are the tasks, sort of I summarized. We have to have a vision. What should be the energy system for the country, given all the constraints and the necessity, mandates for the future generation, etc. You have to have some idea about this coupling for this country and make adjustment. You have to create ecosystem for the businesses. We don't have that. In fact, South Korea has all the laws, the best laws we can find, but then they are not interconnected. There is no ecosystem. The industry can thrive within the system. So you have to have a policy to support that kind of development. And along with public acceptance, we are doing bad in this greenhouse gas issue. So we have to create a vision, and we can even think about regional models. So we have a good solar in the southwest part of the country. Small modular reactors or micro reactors, they don't need large water bodies. So it can be cooled by air. So you can use small reactors in the left side of the country, or you can use large reactors on those right side. Maybe one of the two or a couple of nuclear power plants retiring, those capacity reserved, transmission capacity saved, can be utilized for loosely coupled energy system with renewables to support the industry and then the consumers. We have a bunch of policy issues. I think I'm running out of time, so we may come back to this, but then we have to allow the market or industry to do their job. But right now, that doesn't exist in Korea. The one last thing I want to mention is this thing called cultural divide. So as Professor Park, Dr. Park mentioned, I've been trying to connect the community, the nuclear community and renewable community. Sometimes it's easy, but sometimes very hard. Some people refuse, even both sides. I think the cultural divide comes from big is great, nuclear power, small is beautiful, renewable energy, and they don't want to talk to each other. But I think we have to think twice and then change the way we approach this problem. We have to make peace, talk to each other, and help each other. Thank you.
Thank you all for the wonderful session. In short minute, we'll be starting the closing session. Therefore, please keep your seat until the next session begins. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
I guess there's no question and answer.
If there is a question, I wish to open up the floor. Please raise your hands. Yes, is there a microphone ready? Professor from UC Berkeley first. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you for the very good presentation. I agree that hybrid is the way, and I agree that only renewables, we are going to be in the middle age. No? I agree in these 2 points. Public acceptance is a problem which is based in fear, normally. And based on that, to overcome that fear, I would like to see some numbers that were missing from the presentation. And the number is on the cost of the possible accident of the nuclear reactor. So did we learn something about the Fukuyama cost? Nowadays, if you compare Chernobyl versus Fukuyama, what does it mean, the cost? Because I was checking and it can be tragic. Right now we have only 8 countries that depend on nuclear, France in the top. However, how many Frances do we have in the world? So it's fear-based for me that we have nuclear reactors all over. In that regard, what percentage could be good for the hybrid option? So to be modern, I agree that a percentage of nuclear is good. 75% all over the world, I think we cannot handle that. If you could elaborate on that.
You commented on the cost of accidents like Fukushima, and you asked about safety of nuclear. I guess I divide that in 2 different ways. First, I might note, in the United States, we had 3 Mile Island. No one was hurt. That was 40 years ago. We learned it has been safe for 40 years. France has never had a significant nuclear accident. In the United States, our nuclear navy runs roughly 100 reactors. They have never had an accident. Korea has never had an accident. Yes, Japan had the Fukushima accident, and Japan had a regulator that was controlled by industry. That is not how you regulate. As a previous commissioner of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, we were well aware that that was a problem in Japan, but it was not changed until after Fukushima. The Fukushima accident, even in the analysis by the Japanese Parliament, as they said in their report, was made in Japan. That was an accident caused by a regulator that didn't exist, that it was controlled by industry. So if you want safety, look at the examples in France, in Korea, in the United States, our nuclear navies, and ask or assure that there is an independent regulator. As far as safety, the new generations of plants, the Generation 3+, or the small modular reactors, when they're analyzed on a safety basis, are orders of magnitude safer than any of the previous plants. And again, the public needs to be aware of this. For example, just within the last week, our Nuclear Regulatory Commission approved the methodology based on the NuScale small modular reactor for a 0 emergency planning zone. That means not the 10 miles. That means that in their analysis, there is no conceivable accident for that reactor that can go beyond the boundary of the plant. That's the kind of improvements in safety that have been made in the nuclear industry. In Korea, you have your smart SMR. There's many different SMR designs around the world. There's the Generation 3+. In France, the EPR. In the United States, the AP1000. Is Korea, what is it? The APR 1400. These are new generations of plants. And certainly it's up to the industry, I hope working with the press, to make the point that these are not your grandfather's nuclear power plants. And every nuclear plant that is operating today has been constantly upgraded in order to meet increasing directives from the regulators, whether it's France, whether it's the United States. These plants have evolved. They are far, far safer. I hope these are key points.
Well, Japanese government came up with a report talking about the cost, potential accidents. So the estimate was 1.7 Japanese yen out of 8.8 total Japanese yen cost of electricity from nuclear power.
한마디만 잠깐 좀 드리겠습니다. 잘 들었습니다. 그런데 지금 이 오늘 그 논의한 것의 모든 문제를 해결하는 것이 한국에서 12년 전에 미용고된 것이 있습니다. 그러나 그동안에 제품이 없었기 때문에 반신반의했었는데 이번에 파이로드 제품이 지금 이제 제작이 초읽기에 들어갔습니다. 2020년에는 그것이 선보일 텐데요. 그것은 중력 발전입니다. 그래비티 파워 제너레이터. 핵발전에서처럼 그 핵 폐기물이나 연료를 쓸 필요 없고 사고의 위험도 전혀 없습니다. 그리고 태양광이나 풍력에서처럼 넓은 공간을 차지하지도 않고 출력이 항상 안정되기 때문에 전력이 필요한 모든 곳에 가까이 인접해서 설치할 수가 있습니다. 아무 문제가 없기 때문에. 그러면 송전선도 필요 없습니다. 그러니까 중력은 지구상 어디나 거의 고르게 존재하기 때문에 이 지금까지 모든 문제가 에너지 문제가 모두 해결됩니다. 그러니까 2020년에 인류는 새로운 그 에너지를 보게 될 겁니다. 이상입니다.
Comment was.
Respond in some way.
You want to respond? Yes.
I don't know the details of your gravity system at all, so I cannot comment on that. I never heard of it. However, let me say that when I began at Los Alamos 50 years ago, fusion was 30 years in the future. Today, it is probably 30 years in the future. And that's not a reason not to work on fusion. Fusion may be a wonderful solution, and it deserves a continuing research. But I would not wait for fusion to heat your next cup of tea either.
I think maybe at this point, starting with President Chung, maybe just make one statement summarizing based on some of the comments we received or based on all of the things we have seen from this panel?
Actually, our topic is the combined energy system. So we should think about the assumption. What is our assumption? The safety or efficiency or low carbon? Which one is the most important thing? The priority is most important. So I think we have the problem in each country has different environment. So the United States, right now the solar, the PV cost is less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour in our bidding process. But in Korea, we have more than 5 or 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So that is big difference. So in each country has different energy mix, need a different energy mix based on the efficiency. That is my comment.
Dr. Park?
Maybe I'll 10 seconds to answer your question that the fear about nuclear power is not on the statistics. It's just like even though you have much more automobile accidents than the airplane accidents, the airplane accident only shows in the newspaper. So I can just answer that way. So still we have to work on talking to the people that nuclear reactor in Korea is very, very safe and we can rely on. Okay? But as a final comment, that as he mentioned, that when we prepare the energy strategy, we always have to work based on the energy triangle. First one is energy security, second one is sustainability, third one is affordability. So depending on each country's situation, we have to find the optimum point. And in Korea, like I said, because of this peak-to-valley ratio, building more rigid power in addition to 120 gigawatt is not a smart way of moving it. We have to first try to reduce the energy consumption by introducing fourth industrial revolution technologies and energy efficiency improvement. And I can say that at this moment, the 5 nuclear reactors under construction and 7 coal power plants under construction in Korea. So by the end of 2023, we will have 140 gigawatt installed capacity. How can you use it? Our industry will grow to consume that. So we have to think about answering those questions. This is a Korean situation. Yeah.
Ambassador?
Yes, just a short reflection about safety. I believe that's the cost of an accident, if we have a third big-scale one, like Chernobyl or Fukushima, is simply the survival of the nuclear industry. If we have another accident, the acceptability will be reduced to 0. And if we abandon nuclear energy, we can say goodbye to our action for climate change. That's just as simple as that. So safety is an absolute need for nuclear energy, much more for any other industry, whatever it is. How dangerous they may be in absolute. We need absolutely to have absolutely 0 accidents. Therefore, we should not forget about science. As Dr. Lyons said, there are possibly alternatives now for the current nuclear plants. Small plants of the type which are working in the navies, for example, is a good example. Because indeed, in 40 years, 0 accidents. Only in Hollywood movies. That works. And possibly the weakness of our current plants is that they are too complex. We maybe tried to make them too big. We multiplied the problem with the dimension, and maybe we should do that smaller and more simple in a way. That's what we have to deal with. And certainly, once again, digital is a key ally to nuclear safety, like for the industry at large.
Dr. Lyons.
I very much agree with the comments that have just been made. Let me use my closing comment, however, to compliment whoever designed that logo. The logo of the hourglass of a blue earth transitioning over time with the sands of time moving to a black earth. I think that is brilliant. I have never seen that before. Maybe I'm the only one who hasn't seen it before, but I think that is brilliant, and I compliment whoever designed it.
With that, let's thank our speakers and close the session. Thank you.